Now, whether Scotland decides to stay in the United Kingdom or go it alone as an independent country is the biggest challenge to the British Constitution in 300 years. Alex Salmond doesn't want to settle the question until the autumn of 2014. David Cameron wants the issue resolved earlier, maybe much earlier. But what will the road to the referendum look like? At the moment, there are more questions than answers. Like, when is the referendum taking place? Autumn 2014 is Alex Salmond's favourite date. Last week's Scottish Sun on Sunday said, maybe wrongly, Saturday the 18th of October 2014 would be the day of destiny. But David Cameron has made clear he doesn't want to wait that long.
I think there's a strong case for getting on and asking the question. Scottish people I speak to want to have this debate. They want to have this question answered. There is a cloud hanging over Scotland's future while it is being left. I don't quite see why we have to wait as long as the First Minister wants.
One of the biggest areas of disagreement between London and Edinburgh is over what should be on the ballot paper. The UK government says there should be a single, straightforward question on independence. But the Scottish government wants to include an option on Devo Max. And then there's the question of who will be able to vote. Alex Salmond says 16 and 17-year-olds should have the vote, but wants to exclude Scots in the rest of the UK who aren't on the electoral roll in Scotland. As well as the mechanics of the referendum, there's pressure on the First Minister to set out exactly what an independent Scotland would look like. I travelled to Aberdeen to meet Alex Salmond for today's Sunday interview. First Minister, Scotland faces the most important decision in 300 years. So I'd quite like to get some clarity on what independence would mean. Let's start with head of state. You say you'd keep the Queen. But it wasn't that long ago your party's policy was to have a referendum on a republic, and lots of your members are still Republican-minded. So is this a change simply because you don't want to scare the voters?
Well, I think it's 15 years, and in that 15 years, I mean, the parties have changed policy major times at Westminster. I mean, they're barely recognisable from 15 years ago, but for a number of years we put forward the proposition that Her Majesty the Queen and her successors should be head of state as a constitutional monarchy. Nothing unusual about that. I mean, after all, Scotland and England had 100 years where we had the same monarch but were independent countries. And of course, Her Majesty the Queen is head of state of 16 countries at the present moment. So Scotland would be in that family of nations. Now, I think that's important, incidentally, in terms of the monarchy, but also I think there's a wider message to people, and that is this aspect of the social union between Scotland and England that we want to see continue, and I think the monarchy is a personification of that social union.
So no post-independence referendum on a republic?
Correct.
Let's move on to another area where you seem to have changed policy. You also say you now want to keep the pound in an independent Scotland, but it wasn't that long ago you were an enthusiast for the euro. Why the change?
Well, as was Tony Blair's government, and I think the Liberal Democrats may still be an enthusiast. Well, I'm just saying that, well, I mean, when it wasn't Keynes who was reported as saying, you know, when the facts change, I change my mind. And I think that was a great adage from a great English economist. And obviously, I think, given the condition of the euro, that it's not a sensible policy option to advocate. I don't actually think people in the euro are looking for additional members at the present moment. They're more content to be reconciling the members they've got at the present moment. They're putting forward a sterling zone, which is what we're putting forward. It seems to have a lot of strengths attached to it.
Only 3 years ago, you told Spanish television, only 3 years ago, euro membership is, quote, a strong argument for independence. And you added in, sterling is sinking like a stone.
Well, as I say, I'll rest on John Maynard Keynes. When the facts change, I change my mind. That's not a bad adage.
I understand, but again, just like with the flip-flop on the monarchy, it's hard to avoid the impression that you've changed because you know Scots don't want to join the euro, even though you have been a supporter of euro membership until recently. So you've done it again, not to scare the horses. We'll keep the same head of state. We'll keep the pound, even though only a few years ago you were arguing for the euro.
Well, the only difficulty with your argument, Andrew, is that, you know, I was elected as First Minister of Scotland by a substantial number of Scots in 2007 and re-elected by an overwhelming number of Scots in 2011. So they seem to accept that the evolution of policy is a sensible thing in the modern world.
So you keep the pound. That's your policy. So interest rates would be set in London. And I can remember a time when you used to complain endlessly about interest rates being set in London, but you wouldn't change it.
Well, again, the circumstances have changed. I mean, one of the arguments in terms of sterling was that sterling went through a long period of time where there was a premium in sterling interest rates over, for example, Deutschmark rates in Germany. We're now in a period where sterling interest rates are low, not incidentally the rate paid by many businesses, but nonetheless the official Bank of England rate is extremely low. And I don't think there's an interest rate argument against sterling at the present moment. And I think there are good arguments in favour of the currency zone policy, the sterling zone that we're putting forward. Principally, it would be an optimum economic area.
Interest rates would be set in an independent Scotland to suit the economic conditions of the rest of the UK, not Scotland. Well, it would be the Bank of England
I'm
would
trying
set
to point out that we don't have a single member. There's not a single Scot, not even yourself, Andrew, who would be a lively candidate in the Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of England at the present moment. We're pointing out that if you look at similar arrangements in the past, let's say between Belgium and Luxembourg, who pursued a very successful monetary union over many, many years, then of course Luxembourg had influence, not determination, but influence. But then of course, who actually determines interest rates now? We now live in an era of an independent central bank.
Well, it wouldn't be you, we know that.
Well, neither would it be George Osborne or the UK Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Bank of England.
Yes, I'm merely pointing out,
the
Andrew,
Bank of Scotland.
Not politicians in London, not politicians in Edinburgh, and we would have the ability, through the Monetary Policy Committee, through the institutions we'd have, to argue in terms of the economic conditions that
Not a foregone conclusion they'd let you put a member on.
Well, I think...
Who would that member be? Would that member represent Scotland? Members of the committee are meant to be independent.
Indeed, and that's the point I've just made to you, that an independent... You can hardly argue that we would have no political influence in an independent bank when politicians at Westminster are similarly in a position of no political influence in an independent bank.
If you have monetary union, which is what you're saying, you're having monetary union with the rest of the UK, all the lesson from the recent Eurozone crisis, which is a monetary union, is that for a monetary union to work, it needs a high degree of fiscal union as well. So in an independent Scotland, your fiscal policy would not be totally independent.
Well, I actually disagree with you. I mean, I think the fundamental lesson of the Eurozone crisis is that for a monetary union to work, there has to be comparable productivity rates between the component members of the monetary union. The euro currently has a combination of the economic productivity of the Ruhr Valley with the southern tip of Greece. That's the underlying instability in the euro area. And I'm pointing out that one of the reasons that a sterling zone would work is that we have identical productivity in Scotland to the rest of the UK. So I think the fundamental imbalances within the euro don't apply within a sterling zone. But I agree, you need a fiscal stability arrangement within a monetary union.
So you wouldn't be told... Treasury officials have told us that keeping the pound is a problem because monetary unions don't work with independent fiscal policies. Gavin McCrone, much respected economist here in Scotland, SNP often quotes him, says that your fiscal room for manoeuvre would be limited. Well, and that's a quote.
Yes, but everybody's fiscal room for manoeuvre is limited, Andrew. But if I may say so, I spelt out a speech a couple of weeks back at the London School of Economics to, I think, general acceptance. Half a dozen fiscal policy initiatives you could make to boost growth within the context of a stability pact and monetary union.
Be limited?
Oh, well, your fiscal room for manoeuvre is limited in the modern world.
But
anyway.
Limited by being part of a monetary union with the remaining UK?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily argue that. I mean, let's say your stability pact said that over the long term, your borrowing shouldn't exceed 3% of GDP over the long term. Well, I would argue that's no more than the fiscal discipline that a sensible country would have in any case.
But you would have to, that's interesting though, you would agree to enter into a borrowing pact with London?
No, there would have to be a stability pact of fiscal discipline.
Which would limit the amount you could borrow?
Which would have criteria on the limit could borrow.
Can we clarify whether an independent Scotland would have to reapply for membership of the EU?
Well, no, we wouldn't. We'd be a successor state, one of two successor states. Both of these successor states would have to negotiate, but they would do it within the context of the wider European Union.
But there's no precedent for an EU member state to split. So I understand it's uncharted territory. There are many leading experts, like the professors of international law at Glasgow and Edinburgh universities. I think you and I would agree you can't get better than that. The House of Commons research paper, professor of constitutional law at University College London, said most international lawyers say Scotland would have to reapply. Now, why should Scots believe you rather than these experts?
Well, I'll cite my experts in turn. I mean, Emma Noel, who was Secretary General of the European Union for decades, Eamon Gallagher, who was a Director General of the European Union, Lord Mackenzie Stewart, the only Scottish judge ever to chair the Court of Justice, all argue the contrary position. They argue that both countries would be in the same position with regards to each other and with regard to the European Union. And of course, there is no precedent, incidentally, for any country being expelled
So
from the
we've
European
established that it is unprecedented, though you're trying to give a guarantee. Have you sought advice from your own Scottish law officers in this matter?
We have, yes, in terms of the debate, and obviously,
and what do they say?
You can read that in the documents that we've put forward, which argue the position that would be successful.
What do they say?
Well, you know, I can't give you the legal advice or reveal the legal advice of law officers. You know that, Andrew.
But this is the future of Scotland.
Yes, but what you can say is everything we publish is consistent with the legal advice that we receive. Now, the other point I was going to make to you, we can argue lawyer against lawyer. I'm
simply asking you if you've sought advice, and you tell me you won't tell me the advice.
Well, you know, Andrew, that the only precedent I can think of in terms of the publication of legal advice from any government is the advice on the Iraq War, which had to... But every government, regardless in London or Edinburgh, will not publish legal advice.
But that's standing on Westminster Precedent. This is about the future of our country. Now, don't you owe it to the Scottish people to publish both the advice of the Scottish law officers and the advice of Brussels? Have you got advice from Brussels?
Brussels has answered quite rightly, as you would expect. The Commission has said that they won't answer a hypothetical question. They've said that publicly, although you'll have noted a number of agency reports saying that Commission lawyers actually agree with the successor state argument.
Why are you dragging it out, the timetable for a referendum? Why not just get it over with?
Well, I don't think I'm dragging it out at all. I think I've laid out a very sensible timetable by which the Scottish Parliament can agree these things. If I may say so, the people who seem to be arguing for an earlier timetable seem in no fit condition to argue their case, since they don't even know what their case is, far less how they're going to conduct the argument.
Run it now and win?
Well, I think it's important that when we come to the referendum in the autumn of 2014, that people have an exact proposition on independence, which I pledge to give. All of the questions, your questions, everybody else's questions are answered to people's satisfaction to make a judgment.
So you're doing it to have the union aside?
And, of course, the people have to know in Scotland what the alternative is. Now, in the last few weeks, we've seen a variety of alternatives spring forward. The only thing the anti-independence campaign led by the Tories had agreed on is that they're against independence, but they're disagreeing on everything else they're putting forward. So let's have the things
people in Scotland
ventilated to the people so as we can take a judgment.
And many people in Scotland just think you're feared, to use a good Scottish word. You're feared, you're frightened, because you think you would lose if you had the referendum now.
But many people, not just in Scotland, but in London as well, told me, you know, there wouldn't be a Scottish Parliament, and there is. Then they told me there wouldn't be an SNP government in the Parliament, and there has been. And then they told me we wouldn't be re-elected, and we are. No, I think we'll win the referendum. In fact, so confident are we about winning the referendum that shortly after the local elections in Scotland in May, and the final position on the Scottish Government's consultation, which I think is 11th of May, then the Yes campaign will be launched. And that campaign won't just be the Scottish National Party, it will be a broad-based campaign with Civic Scotland, with the job creators of Scotland, with the unions of Scotland, a variety of people coming together to enunciate the case for independence. And that positive approach is going to contrast very markedly with our opponents who are united only in their negativity.
Alexander, thank you.